The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Eldoria Palace as Prince Alexander made his way through the corridors he had walked countless times before. The kingdom of Eldoria had been in mourning for 3 months since Queen Isabella's sudden passing, and the weight of grief still hung heavy in the ornate halls. Alexander, the Queen's beloved grandson, had been struggling to find his place in a world without the woman who had raised him after his parents died in a tragic accident when he was just 7 years old. Captain Marcus Thorne, the head of the Royal Guard, had served the royal family for over 2 decades. His loyalty was unquestioned, his dedication absolute. That Tuesday morning, he was conducting his routine inspection of the Queen's former chambers, which had been sealed since her death according to royal protocol. The rooms would remain untouched for 1 year as per tradition, but security checks were still necessary. As Marcus moved through the Queen's private study, something caught his eye. Behind an ancient tapestry depicting the founding of Eldoria, there appeared to be a slight bulge in the wall. His trained eye immediately recognized that something was concealed behind the heavy fabric. With careful hands, he lifted the tapestry and discovered a hidden panel in the ornate woodwork. The panel was slightly ajar, as if someone had recently accessed it but failed to close it completely. Inside the secret compartment, Marcus found a leather-bound document case bearing the royal seal. His heart began to race as he realized the significance of what he might have discovered. The case was locked, but the key hung on a delicate gold chain attached to the handle. With trembling fingers, he unlocked the case and found several documents inside, including what appeared to be a last will and testament dated just 2 weeks before Queen Isabella's death. The document was written in the Queen's distinctive handwriting, a script Marcus had seen countless times on royal correspondence. As he began to read, his face grew pale with shock. The will explicitly stated that upon Queen Isabella's death, the throne of Eldoria would pass not to her son, King Edmund, as everyone had assumed, but directly to her grandson, Prince Alexander. The reasoning was detailed in the Queen's own words, expressing her concerns about King Edmund's recent behavior and decision-making abilities. Queen Isabella had written about her growing worries regarding her son's increasing isolation from the people of Eldoria and his tendency to make impulsive decisions without consulting his advisors. She had observed his struggles with the responsibilities of leadership and feared that his reign would bring instability to the kingdom she had worked so hard to build and maintain. In contrast, she praised Alexander's wisdom, compassion, and natural leadership abilities that reminded her of her late husband, King Richard. The will was properly witnessed and notarized by the kingdom's highest legal authorities, making it legally binding under Eldorian law. Marcus realized that this document would completely change the line of succession and potentially throw the entire kingdom into chaos. King Edmund had already been ruling for 3 months, making important decisions and signing treaties in his capacity as the rightful monarch. Marcus carefully placed the documents back in the case and secured it under his uniform. He knew he had to inform Prince Alexander immediately, but he also understood the gravity of the situation. This information could destroy the royal family and potentially lead to civil unrest if not handled properly. The captain made his way quickly through the palace corridors, his mind racing with the implications of what he had discovered. Prince Alexander was in the palace gardens, his favorite place to find solace since his grandmother's death. He often came here to remember the countless hours they had spent together, discussing everything from kingdom affairs to his personal dreams and aspirations. The Rose Garden, in particular, held special memories as Queen Isabella had taught him about leadership while they tended to the flowers together. When Captain Thorne approached, Alexander could immediately sense that something was terribly wrong. The usually composed guard captain appeared agitated and kept glancing around as if ensuring they were not being observed. Marcus requested a private audience with the prince, explaining that he had discovered something of utmost importance that could not wait for a more appropriate time. Alexander led the captain to a secluded pavilion in the garden where they could speak without fear of being overheard. The prince had always trusted Marcus implicitly, knowing that the man had risked his own life multiple times to protect the royal family. When Marcus produced the leather case and began to explain his discovery, Alexander's world began to crumble around him. As Marcus read portions of the will aloud, Alexander felt his knees grow weak. The words seemed impossible to comprehend. His beloved grandmother had chosen him over his uncle to inherit the throne, but she had never given him any indication of her intentions. The weight of this revelation was overwhelming, especially considering that King Edmund had been ruling for months, believing himself to be the rightful monarch. Alexander's mind raced with questions and concerns. How could he possibly tell his uncle that he had been ruling illegally? What would happen to all the decisions Edmund had made during his time on the throne? How would the people of Eldoria react to such shocking news? The prince had always been close to his uncle, despite their occasional disagreements about kingdom policies, and the thought of causing him such pain was almost unbearable. The emotional toll of the discovery began to manifest physically as Alexander struggled to process the information. His breathing became labored, and he felt dizzy and disoriented. The stress of losing his grandmother, combined with the shock of this revelation and the enormous responsibility it placed on his shoulders, proved to be too much for the young prince to bear. Captain Thorne watched in alarm as Alexander's face grew ashen and he began to sway unsteadily. The prince tried to speak, but his words came out as barely coherent whispers. Within moments, Alexander collapsed onto the stone floor of the pavilion, unconscious from the overwhelming shock of learning about his grandmother's secret will and his true destiny as the rightful heir to the throne of Eldoria. Captain Marcus Thorne immediately sprang into action when Prince Alexander collapsed, his military training taking over in the crisis. He quickly checked Alexander's pulse and breathing, relieved to find both steady but weak. The captain carefully lifted the unconscious prince and carried him to a nearby stone bench in the pavilion, positioning him to ensure proper airflow. Marcus knew he needed medical assistance urgently, but he also understood that calling for help would draw unwanted attention to their secret meeting. Using his communication device, Marcus discreetly contacted Dr. Helena Voss, the royal family's trusted physician who had served them for over 15 years. He spoke in coded language, requesting her immediate but quiet presence in the garden pavilion, indicating a medical emergency involving Prince Alexander. Dr. Voss, accustomed to such requests given the sensitive nature of royal health matters, gathered her medical supplies and made her way quickly to the location. When Dr. Voss arrived at the pavilion, she found Prince Alexander beginning to regain consciousness, though he remained disoriented and pale. After conducting a thorough examination, she determined that the prince had suffered from acute stress reaction combined with emotional shock, leading to a vasovagal response that caused his collapse. His blood pressure had dropped significantly, and his body had essentially shut down temporarily to protect itself from the overwhelming stress. As Alexander slowly came to his senses, the memories of Captain Thorne's revelation came flooding back. The hidden will, his grandmother's secret decision, the implications for his uncle's reign, and his own unexpected destiny as the rightful heir to the throne all crashed over him like a tidal wave. Dr. Voss administered a mild sedative to help calm his racing heart and instructed him to rest while she spoke privately with Captain Thorne. Marcus explained the situation to Dr. Voss in general terms, without revealing the specific contents of the documents he had discovered. He told her that Alexander had received shocking news about the royal family that had proven too overwhelming for him to process. Dr. Voss, who had known Alexander since he was a child, understood that whatever he had learned must be of extraordinary significance to cause such a severe reaction in someone known for his emotional strength and stability. Meanwhile, in the main palace, King Edmund was conducting his regular morning meetings with various ministers and advisors. He had been working diligently to fill the void left by his mother's death, though he often felt inadequate compared to Queen Isabella's legendary leadership skills. Edmund had always been more comfortable in academic pursuits than in the political arena, but he was determined to honor his mother's memory by ruling Eldoria with wisdom and compassion. Lord Chancellor Vincent Ashworth, King Edmund's chief advisor, had noticed subtle changes in the king's demeanor over the past few weeks. Edmund seemed more anxious than usual, often questioning his decisions and seeking excessive reassurance from his counselors. The Chancellor attributed this behavior to the natural stress of new leadership and grief over Queen Isabella's death, but he was beginning to worry about the king's confidence in his own abilities. During the morning council meeting, King Edmund struggled to concentrate on the various reports and recommendations being presented to him. His mind kept drifting to memories of his mother and the weight of expectations that came with wearing the crown. He found himself wondering if he was truly worthy of the throne and whether he possessed the qualities necessary to lead Eldoria into a prosperous future. Back in the garden pavilion, Prince Alexander had stabilized enough to sit upright, though he still felt weak and emotionally drained. Dr. Voss recommended that he rest for the remainder of the day and avoid any strenuous activities or stressful situations. However, Alexander knew that rest would be impossible with the knowledge he now carried. The burden of his grandmother's secret will weigh heavily on his mind, and he struggled with the ethical implications of keeping this information hidden. Captain Thorne presented Alexander with the difficult choice he now faced. He could reveal the will immediately, which would legitimize his claim to the throne but would also devastate King Edmund and potentially cause political upheaval in Eldoria. Alternatively, he could keep the will secret temporarily while deciding on the best course of action, though this would mean allowing his uncle to continue ruling without knowledge of his illegal status. Alexander found himself torn between his love for his uncle and his duty to honor his grandmother's wishes. He had never harbored any ambition for the throne, having always assumed that King Edmund would rule for many years. The prospect of becoming king was both terrifying and overwhelming, especially given the circumstances under which he would have to claim the throne. Dr. Voss observed the intense conversation between Alexander and Captain Thorne, though she could not hear their specific words. She could see the emotional turmoil written clearly on the prince's face and recognized that whatever decision he was contemplating would have far-reaching consequences. As a longtime friend of the royal family, she felt compelled to offer her support and counsel, even without knowing the full details of the situation. The afternoon sun began to cast longer shadows across the garden as Alexander struggled with his decision. He thought about his grandmother's teachings and the lessons she had imparted about leadership, responsibility, and moral courage. Queen Isabella had always emphasized the importance of doing what was right for the kingdom, even when it required personal sacrifice or difficult choices. Captain Thorne suggested that Alexander might benefit from seeking counsel from Lady Margaret Sinclair, Queen Isabella's former lady-in-waiting and closest confidant. Lady Margaret had served the royal family for over 30 years and possessed intimate knowledge of the Queen's thoughts and intentions during her final months. She might be able to provide insight into why Queen Isabella had made such a momentous decision without informing anyone in the family. As the day progressed, Alexander realized that he could not bear the burden of this secret alone. The knowledge of the hidden will was already affecting his ability to interact normally with his uncle and other family members. Every conversation with King Edmund felt like a betrayal, knowing that he was concealing information that would fundamentally change Edmund's understanding of his position and legitimacy as ruler. The emotional weight of the situation began to manifest in physical symptoms again as Alexander experienced recurring waves of nausea and dizziness. Dr. Voss remained concerned about his condition and recommended that he spend the night in the medical wing for observation. However, Alexander insisted on returning to his chambers, where he could think more clearly about the impossible situation he found himself in. As evening approached, Alexander made the decision to meet with Lady Margaret the following morning. He hoped that she might possess additional information about Queen Isabella's motivations or perhaps even knowledge of other documents that could clarify the situation. Captain Thorne agreed to arrange the meeting discreetly, ensuring that it would not attract attention from other palace staff or members of the royal family. That night, Alexander lay awake in his chambers, staring at the ceiling and replaying the day's events over and over in his mind. The leather case containing his grandmother's will was now secured in his personal safe, but its contents continued to haunt his thoughts. He wondered if Queen Isabella had intended for the will to be discovered so soon after her death or if she had planned for it to remain hidden for a longer period. The prince also contemplated the broader implications of his grandmother's decision. What had she observed about King Edmund's leadership that had prompted her to bypass him in the line of succession? Alexander had always respected his uncle and believed him to be a good man with genuine concern for the welfare of Eldoria's people. The thought that his grandmother might have harbored serious doubts about Edmund's fitness to rule was deeply troubling and added another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming situation. The following morning arrived with an unusual chill in the air, as if the very atmosphere of Eldoria Palace had sensed the tension brewing within its walls. Prince Alexander had barely slept, his mind churning with questions and doubts about the path forward. He dressed carefully, knowing that his meeting with Lady Margaret Sinclair could provide crucial insights into his grandmother's final intentions and the reasoning behind her shocking decision to alter the line of succession. Lady Margaret had served Queen Isabella with unwavering devotion for 3 decades, witnessing both the triumphs and struggles of the royal family. At 72 years old, she possessed a sharp mind and an encyclopedic knowledge of palace protocols, family histories, and the intricate relationships that shaped Eldorian politics. When Captain Thorne approached her with Alexander's request for a private meeting, she immediately sensed that something of great importance was troubling the young prince. The meeting was arranged in Lady Margaret's private sitting room, a cozy space filled with mementos from her years of service and personal gifts from Queen Isabella. Alexander arrived punctually, his face showing the strain of a sleepless night and the weight of the secret he carried. Lady Margaret welcomed him with the same maternal warmth she had shown him throughout his childhood, but her experienced eyes quickly detected the deep distress behind his composed facade. Alexander began by asking Lady Margaret about Queen Isabella's state of mind during her final months, particularly regarding matters of succession and the future of the kingdom. Lady Margaret's expression grew thoughtful as she recalled those difficult weeks when the Queen's health was declining, but her mental faculties remained sharp and her concern for Eldoria's future intensified rather than diminished. Lady Margaret revealed that Queen Isabella had indeed been troubled by certain aspects of King Edmund's leadership style and decision-making processes. The Queen had confided her concerns about her son's increasing tendency toward isolation and his reluctance to engage directly with the people of Eldoria. She worried that Edmund's academic background and scholarly nature, while admirable, might not be well suited to the practical demands of modern monarchy. The elderly lady-in-waiting went on to describe specific incidents that had troubled Queen Isabella. There was Edmund's handling of a recent trade dispute with neighboring kingdoms, where his indecisiveness had prolonged negotiations unnecessarily and potentially cost Eldoria valuable economic opportunities. There was also his response to a flooding crisis in the southern provinces, where his preference for committee meetings and detailed reports had delayed critical relief efforts. Lady Margaret paused in her recollection, studying Alexander's face carefully before continuing. She revealed that Queen Isabella had often spoken about Alexander's natural leadership abilities and his intuitive understanding of what the people needed. The Queen had been impressed by how Alexander handled himself during public appearances and his genuine concern for the welfare of ordinary citizens. She had frequently compared his approach to that of his grandfather, King Richard, who had been beloved throughout the kingdom. When Alexander finally revealed the existence of the hidden will, Lady Margaret's reaction was not one of shock but rather of sad understanding. She admitted that she had suspected Queen Isabella might take such action, given the depth of her concerns about the kingdom's future under Edmund's rule. Lady Margaret revealed that the Queen had asked her several pointed questions about succession laws and the procedures for altering royal wills in the weeks before her death. The revelation that Lady Margaret had suspected the Queen's intentions provided Alexander with some comfort, but it also confirmed the legitimacy of the document he had discovered. Lady Margaret examined the will carefully, verifying the Queen's handwriting and signature, and confirmed that it appeared to be authentic and legally binding under Eldorian law. Lady Margaret then shared additional information that shed light on Queen Isabella's decision-making process. The Queen had spent considerable time reviewing historical precedents for succession changes and had consulted privately with several legal scholars about the constitutional implications of bypassing the traditional heir. She had also observed Alexander's responses to various challenges and crises, testing his judgment and leadership instincts without his knowledge. The conversation revealed that Queen Isabella had been particularly influenced by Alexander's handling of a diplomatic incident involving visiting foreign dignitaries. When a protocol error had threatened to embarrass the kingdom, Alexander had quickly assessed the situation, consulted with relevant experts, and implemented a solution that not only resolved the immediate problem but also strengthened Eldoria's relationships with the affected nations. The Queen had been impressed by his quick thinking, diplomatic skills, and ability to turn a potential disaster into a positive outcome. Lady Margaret also disclosed that Queen Isabella had expressed concerns about King Edmund's health, both physical and mental. The stress of leadership expectations had begun to take a noticeable toll on Edmund even before he assumed the throne, and the Queen worried that the full weight of monarchy might prove overwhelming for him. She had observed signs of anxiety and depression in her son that reminded her of his struggles during adolescence when he had difficulty coping with public attention and royal responsibilities. As their conversation continued, Alexander learned that his grandmother had actually prepared multiple documents beyond the will itself. Lady Margaret revealed the existence of a detailed letter addressed specifically to Alexander, explaining her reasoning and providing guidance for his transition to the throne. There was also a separate letter intended for King Edmund, designed to help him understand and accept the decision while offering him alternative roles within the royal structure. The discovery of these additional documents provided Alexander with a clearer picture of his grandmother's comprehensive planning and her concern for all members of the family. Queen Isabella had anticipated the emotional turmoil that her decision would create and had attempted to provide resources for managing the transition as smoothly as possible. However, she had also recognized that the timing of the revelation would be crucial and had left that decision to whoever discovered the documents. Lady Margaret strongly advised Alexander that he could not delay indefinitely in revealing the truth. Every day that King Edmund continued to rule without knowledge of his illegitimate status created additional complications and potential legal challenges. Important decisions made during an illegal reign could be challenged in court, potentially creating chaos in government operations and international relationships. The weight of this advice pressed heavily on Alexander's shoulders as he realized that his period of deliberation was rapidly coming to an end. Lady Margaret offered to assist in revealing the truth to King Edmund and other family members, suggesting that her presence might help provide context and emotional support during what would undoubtedly be one of the most difficult conversations in the family's history. As their meeting concluded, Alexander felt both relieved and more burdened than before. The confirmation that his grandmother's decision was carefully considered and legally sound removed any doubts about the authenticity of the will, but it also eliminated any hope that the situation might somehow resolve itself or prove to be a misunderstanding. Lady Margaret provided Alexander with the additional documents Queen Isabella had prepared, sealed in elegant envelopes bearing the royal crest. She emphasized that these letters contained wisdom and guidance that could help both Alexander and Edmund navigate the difficult transition ahead. However, she also warned that reading them would make Alexander's burden even heavier, as they would provide intimate insights into his grandmother's fears and hopes for the kingdom's future. That afternoon, Alexander retreated to his private study to read his grandmother's personal letter. The document was written in Queen Isabella's distinctive style, combining formal royal language with the warm, personal tone she had always used when speaking with her beloved grandson. The letter began with expressions of love and confidence in Alexander's abilities, followed by detailed explanations of her concerns about the kingdom's future and her belief that he was better suited to address the challenges facing Eldoria. Queen Isabella's letter also contained specific advice about managing the transition, including recommendations for key advisors, strategies for maintaining stability during the change in leadership, and suggestions for helping Edmund find a new role that would utilize his strengths while removing him from the pressures he was poorly equipped to handle. The Queen's foresight and planning were evident in every paragraph, demonstrating the depth of her consideration and the difficulty of her decision. After spending hours absorbing the contents of Queen Isabella's personal letter, Prince Alexander felt the full weight of his destiny settling upon his shoulders like a heavy royal mantle. The letter had provided him with clarity about his grandmother's motivations, but it had also revealed the enormous challenges that lay ahead. Queen Isabella had not only chosen him as her successor but had also entrusted him with the delicate task of preserving the family's unity while ensuring the kingdom's stability during an unprecedented transition. The letter contained specific warnings about potential threats to the kingdom that Queen Isabella had identified during her final months. She had observed concerning developments in neighboring territories and suspected that Eldoria's enemies might attempt to exploit any signs of weakness or instability in the royal succession. This added urgency to Alexander's decision, as prolonging the uncertainty could provide opportunities for external forces to interfere in Eldorian affairs. Alexander realized that he could no longer postpone the inevitable confrontation with King Edmund. The moral burden of allowing his uncle to continue ruling under false pretenses had become unbearable, and the practical risks of delay were mounting with each passing day. He decided that the conversation should take place that evening, in the privacy of the king's personal chambers, where they could speak freely without fear of interruption or eavesdropping. Captain Marcus Thorne had been monitoring the situation carefully, understanding that the royal family was approaching a critical moment that could reshape the entire kingdom. He had quietly begun making preparations for various contingencies, including security measures that might be necessary if the revelation led to civil unrest or attempts by hostile forces to exploit the confusion. His loyalty to the crown remained absolute, regardless of who ultimately proved to be the legitimate ruler. Lady Margaret Sinclair had also been preparing for the moment of truth, gathering additional documents and evidence that might be needed to support the authenticity of Queen Isabella's will. She had discreetly contacted Lord Chancellor Vincent Ashworth, requesting a private meeting to discuss urgent matters of constitutional law without revealing the specific nature of her concerns. Her goal was to ensure that legal experts would be immediately available to address any questions about succession procedures. As evening approached, King Edmund was finishing his daily review of government documents in his private study. He had been working diligently to address various domestic and international issues, though he continued to struggle with feelings of inadequacy compared to his mother's legendary leadership abilities. The stress of his position was evident in his appearance, as he had lost weight and developed dark circles under his eyes during his months on the throne. Alexander requested an audience with his uncle, using the formal protocols that governed interactions between family members when discussing matters of state. King Edmund welcomed the meeting, hoping that his nephew might provide some of the emotional support and counsel that had been missing since Queen Isabella's death. The two men had maintained a close relationship despite their occasional disagreements about policy matters. When Alexander arrived at the king's chambers, he carried with him the leather document case containing Queen Isabella's will and the additional letters she had prepared. His hands trembled slightly as he prepared to deliver news that would fundamentally alter his uncle's understanding of his position and legitimacy. The gravity of the moment was overwhelming, as Alexander realized he was about to destroy his uncle's world while simultaneously accepting an enormous responsibility he had never sought. King Edmund immediately noticed Alexander's obvious distress and invited him to sit in the comfortable chairs near the fireplace where they had shared many conversations over the years. The king poured 2 glasses of wine, hoping to create a more relaxed atmosphere for whatever discussion his nephew had requested. However, Alexander's formal demeanor and the document case he clutched suggested that this would not be a casual family conversation. Alexander began by expressing his deep love and respect for King Edmund, emphasizing that what he was about to reveal was not a reflection of any personal animosity or political ambition on his part. He explained that recent discoveries had brought to light information that would have profound implications for the kingdom and the royal family. The careful way Alexander chose his words immediately put King Edmund on alert, as he sensed that devastating news was about to be delivered. When Alexander produced Queen Isabella's hidden will and began to explain the circumstances of its discovery, King Edmund's face went through a series of transformations, from confusion to disbelief to growing horror. The king's hands began to shake as he listened to Alexander read portions of the document aloud, particularly the sections that explicitly named Alexander as the rightful heir to the throne of Eldoria. King Edmund's initial reaction was to question the authenticity of the document, suggesting that it might be an elaborate forgery created by political enemies seeking to destabilize the kingdom. However, as Alexander presented additional evidence, including Lady Margaret's testimony and Queen Isabella's personal letters, the king was forced to confront the reality that his mother had indeed chosen to bypass him in the line of succession. The emotional impact on King Edmund was immediate and devastating. He had devoted his entire life to preparing for the throne, believing that his mother had confidence in his abilities despite his natural reservations about leadership. The discovery that Queen Isabella had harbored such serious doubts about his fitness to rule felt like the ultimate betrayal, calling into question everything he thought he knew about his relationship with his mother. As the conversation continued, King Edmund demanded to read his mother's letter explaining her decision. Alexander hesitated to share this deeply personal document, knowing that its contents would cause additional pain, but ultimately decided that his uncle deserved to understand the reasoning behind Queen Isabella's choice. The letter was brutally honest about the Queen's concerns, detailing specific incidents where Edmund's leadership had fallen short of her expectations. Reading his mother's criticisms in her own handwriting proved to be almost more than King Edmund could bear. The letter described his indecisiveness, his tendency toward isolation, and his apparent inability to connect with the common people of Eldoria. While Queen Isabella had written with love and concern rather than malice, her words cut deeply into Edmund's already fragile confidence and sense of self-worth. King Edmund's response alternated between anger, denial, and profound sadness. He questioned why his mother had never discussed her concerns with him directly, denying him the opportunity to address her criticisms or improve his performance. The secrecy surrounding her decision felt like a final rejection, suggesting that Queen Isabella had lost faith in his ability to change or grow into the role she had expected him to fulfill. The conversation stretched on for hours as both men grappled with the implications of the revelation. King Edmund struggled to accept that his 3 months of rule had been based on a false premise, while Alexander wrestled with guilt over his role in exposing the truth and uncertainty about his readiness to assume the throne. The weight of the situation seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. Eventually, King Edmund asked about the legal implications of the discovery and what steps would need to be taken to implement Queen Isabella's wishes. Alexander explained that constitutional experts would need to review the documents and establish procedures for the transition, but that the will appeared to be legally binding under Eldorian law. This meant that Edmund's reign was indeed illegitimate and that Alexander was the rightful king. The realization that he would need to abdicate publicly and transfer power to his nephew filled King Edmund with dread. The humiliation of admitting that he had been ruling illegally for months would be difficult enough, but the broader implications for his reputation and legacy were even more troubling. He worried about how history would remember his brief and illegitimate reign and whether he would be viewed as a usurper or merely as a victim of circumstances beyond his control. As the evening wore on, both men began to discuss practical considerations for managing the transition. Alexander emphasized his desire to handle the situation with dignity and respect for Edmund's position, while Edmund slowly began to accept the reality of his situation and consider how he might contribute to ensuring a smooth transfer of power. The love between uncle and nephew remained strong despite the devastating circumstances, providing a foundation for working together during the difficult period ahead. The days following the revelation were among the most challenging in the history of the Eldorian royal family. King Edmund had initially requested time to process the shocking news privately before making any public announcements, and Alexander had agreed to maintain secrecy for a brief period while they developed a comprehensive plan for the transition. However, both men understood that the truth could not remain hidden for long without creating additional complications. Lord Chancellor Vincent Ashworth was quietly brought into their confidence and tasked with researching the constitutional procedures for implementing Queen Isabella's will. His initial review confirmed that the document was legally binding and that Alexander was indeed the rightful heir to the throne. However, Ashworth also identified several complex issues that would need to be addressed, including the validity of decisions made during Edmund's illegitimate reign and the procedures for a formal abdication and coronation. Lady Margaret Sinclair worked closely with Alexander to prepare for the transition, drawing upon her decades of experience with royal protocols and her intimate knowledge of Queen Isabella's wishes. She helped Alexander understand the various ceremonial and practical aspects of assuming the throne, while also providing emotional support during what was undoubtedly the most difficult period of his life. Captain Marcus Thorne had discreetly briefed his most trusted officers about potential security concerns during the transition period. He was particularly worried about the possibility that news of the succession change might leak prematurely, creating panic or providing opportunities for hostile forces to exploit the situation. His preparations included enhanced security measures for both Alexander and Edmund, as well as contingency plans for maintaining order if civil unrest occurred. King Edmund spent several days in relative isolation, struggling to come to terms with his mother's decision and his own uncertain future. The emotional toll of learning about Queen Isabella's doubts regarding his leadership abilities had been devastating, but he gradually began to accept the reality of the situation and focus on how he could best serve the kingdom during the transition. His love for Eldoria ultimately outweighed his personal pain and disappointment. The first major challenge came when several foreign ambassadors requested urgent meetings with King Edmund regarding important trade negotiations that had been ongoing for months. Alexander and Edmund realized that continuing these discussions under false pretenses would be unethical and potentially illegal, but revealing the truth prematurely could jeopardize Eldoria's international relationships. They decided to postpone the meetings temporarily while accelerating their timeline for the public announcement. Dr. Helena Voss had been monitoring both Alexander and Edmund during this difficult period, concerned about the physical and emotional stress affecting both men. She observed signs of anxiety and depression in King Edmund, while Alexander displayed symptoms of overwhelming pressure and fear about his impending responsibilities. The doctor recommended that both men seek additional support and counseling to help them navigate the transition more effectively. As the week progressed, Alexander began meeting with key government ministers and advisors to prepare for his assumption of power. These conversations were carefully structured to gather information about ongoing issues and policies without revealing the true reason for his sudden interest in governmental affairs. However, several perceptive officials began to suspect that significant changes were forthcoming within the royal family. The emotional relationship between Alexander and Edmund remained strong despite the difficult circumstances, but both men struggled with feelings of guilt and uncertainty about their respective roles. Alexander felt terrible about displacing his beloved uncle, while Edmund battled with shame about his mother's lack of confidence in his abilities. Their conversations during this period were often tense and emotionally charged, requiring careful navigation to maintain family unity. Lady Margaret suggested that the announcement be made during a formal ceremony that would honor both Queen Isabella's memory and the continuity of the royal line. She proposed that Edmund's abdication be framed as a noble sacrifice made in service to the kingdom rather than as evidence of his inadequacy as a ruler. This approach would help preserve Edmund's dignity while establishing Alexander's legitimacy as the new monarch. The legal documents necessary for the transition were prepared with meticulous care, ensuring that every aspect of the succession would be handled according to constitutional requirements. Lord Chancellor Ashworth worked with legal experts to address potential challenges to decisions made during Edmund's reign, developing solutions that would maintain governmental stability while acknowledging the unusual circumstances. Captain Thorne coordinated with palace staff to prepare for the public announcement, which would require careful timing and presentation to minimize shock and maintain confidence in the royal institution. Security measures were enhanced throughout the kingdom, with particular attention paid to potential flashpoints where civil unrest might occur if the news was received poorly by certain segments of the population. Alexander spent considerable time studying Queen Isabella's additional letters and advice, seeking guidance about how to begin his reign effectively. The Queen had provided detailed recommendations about key appointments, policy priorities, and strategies for building public confidence in his leadership. Her wisdom and foresight continued to guide the transition even months after her death. The day of the announcement arrived with a mixture of anticipation and dread among those who knew the truth. The ceremony was held in the throne room of Eldoria Palace, with key government officials, foreign dignitaries, and members of the nobility in attendance. Edmund spoke first, delivering a carefully crafted speech about his decision to step aside in favor of his nephew, whom he described as better suited to lead Eldoria into the future. Alexander's acceptance speech acknowledged the unusual circumstances while emphasizing his commitment to serving the kingdom with the same dedication and wisdom that had characterized Queen Isabella's reign. He praised Edmund's service during the transition period and announced his intention to appoint his uncle to a senior advisory role that would utilize his knowledge and experience while removing him from the pressures of ultimate leadership responsibility. The public reaction to the announcement was mixed, with some citizens expressing confusion and concern about the unprecedented nature of the succession change. However, Alexander's reputation for integrity and compassion, combined with Edmund's gracious handling of his abdication, helped maintain stability and confidence in the royal institution. International partners also responded positively, recognizing that the transition had been handled with dignity and according to proper legal procedures. In the weeks following his coronation, King Alexander worked diligently to establish his leadership credibility while implementing policies that reflected both his own vision and Queen Isabella's advice. He appointed a diverse group of advisors that included both experienced officials and fresh voices, creating a government structure that balanced continuity with innovation. Edmund found new purpose in his role as senior advisor, discovering that he was much more effective as a counselor and policy analyst than he had been as the ultimate decision-maker. His scholarly nature and attention to detail proved valuable in supporting Alexander's more intuitive and people-focused leadership style. The two men developed an effective working relationship that strengthened both their personal bond and their service to the kingdom. The discovery of Queen Isabella's hidden will had initially threatened to destroy the royal family and create chaos in Eldoria, but the careful and principled way that Alexander and Edmund handled the transition ultimately strengthened both the monarchy and the kingdom. The crisis had revealed the importance of honest communication, principled leadership, and putting the welfare of the people above personal ambition or comfort. Years later, historians would note that the succession crisis of King Alexander's early reign had actually marked the beginning of a new golden age for Eldoria. The kingdom prospered under his leadership, while Edmund's contributions as an advisor helped ensure that policy decisions were well researched and thoughtfully implemented. Queen Isabella's wisdom in recognizing Alexander's potential and planning for a smooth transition had ultimately proven to be one of her greatest gifts to the kingdom she had loved and served so faithfully throughout her long and distinguished reign.